is the Page Publishing Book Club. I'm your host, Alice Stockton Rossini. Rob Barrett's how you doing, my engineer? And would you look at this? Happy New Year, Rob! And to all of our Page Publishing Book Club fans. What do you say we put 2017 to bed and wake up to 2018? Woohoo! It's going to be a great year, I can feel it. Especially if we manage to do those things we have always wanted to do. For the purposes of this show, it's to get that book done. You know what book I'm talking about. That book. You know that book. Writing about that's something you're passionate about or that's something you did your whole life, like Jeffrey L. Diamond. He spent 40 years working in TV news as a writer, director, producer. He's the guy who created Dateline NBC. I know you've heard of that. He worked at 2020, and he did a ton of crime stories in his career, including one about a crazy killer, on which he based his book, Live to Tape. Jeffrey.
A killer that's in jail who speaks to a production team headed by my hero, Ethan Benson, about his crime. And during the course of producing this story that Ethan is working on, he discovers a dark secret that this killer is hiding. You know, the killer himself, a guy named Rufus Wellington, is literally plucked right out of the story I did for 2020 in the, mid-1980s. We interviewed a serial killer named Henry Lee Lucas, and he was literally the most frightening human being I've ever spent time with. And when I was writing the Rufus Wellington character in my book, the killer in my book, I tried to draw from the feelings that I walked away from after I interviewed Henry Lee Lucas and kind of incorporate those feelings and his whole personality, into the character in my book. But I've interviewed a lot of other people who will make very good characters in other books that I write. I love writing. I spent many years commuting back and forth from Richmond, Massachusetts to New York City. My family was living in the Berkshires here in Richmond, and I was living in New York during the week. I'd go home every weekend, sometimes 2 days, sometimes 3 days. But every night, I read fiction to try to relax from the grind of working in television news. And when I retired, I was kind of lost for a little while trying to figure out how to spend my life, what to do with myself. You can't just sit around outside all day and swim and fish and do all the other stuff that you do up here in the Berkshires. So I sat down one day and I decided that, I had a lot of writing experience, in the world of television. I was just curious if I could write a novel. I just read hundreds of them. And that's how I got started with the Ethan Benson thriller series.
So, this is part of a series.
First one published with Page. The first book, Live to Air, that's the first book in the series. Live to Tape is the second. I've already finished a third book. It's called Live to the Network. And I hope to get that off to Page sometime in January so I can spread them out about a year apart.
Good for you. I mean, you know what's frustrating is anybody who writes in radio or television knows that you have to stay within time constraints. And it makes it really difficult if you want to build something up or if you want to add some flowery words. Like there's no time, especially in radio, there's no time for that. So to be given the luxury of being able to express yourself, and you probably have so many stories and so many things that happened to you throughout the course of your career, covering the kinds of stories that you covered.
Yeah, I have an endless number of scenarios I can write into novels.
So, you could have gone with anyone. Why did you go with Page?
I went with Page because, I sent my manuscript out to 3 or 4 independent publishing companies, smaller publishing companies. And it went through the review process at Page, and they called me and said they'd like to publish it. And I don't use an agent, and I just liked the vibe I got, when I started talking to Page, and I think they did a tremendous job in putting my book together.
I interview
That's all right.
so many first-time writers, so many people that want to write, can't get off the dime, and so many that don't realize the importance of getting out there and promoting your book.
Yes, I'm actually in the middle of a book tour. I'm in the middle of about 20 stores, and you have to get out there. You have to really sell your book. Page does a minimal amount of marketing for you. I have lots of friends who are authors, and they all tell me that you have to do it yourself. That getting out there and promoting the book, doing radio interviews, doing podcasts, going to bookstores, doing readings, doing lectures. That's the only way you're going to get your book out there and have any success with selling it.
Yep. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. You got to get out there. We say that all the time. If you do nothing else, you have to put yourself behind it. All right. Larry O'Neill Sr. is a retired Cleveland cop who wants people to understand what it's like to be a cop who has to make split-second decisions on the job. The name of his book, Let's Ride, Partner.
A lot of times, making split-second decisions can help one person, but you can make enemies with another very quickly. And it's a shoot, don't shoot situation sometimes, and that's even worse. And being a police officer in the past, I did deal with that, maybe at least two times, and what you will read about in my book, Let's Ride Partner, and along with many other exciting, action-packed stories, true stories. Some of them are graphic but true.
Well, does any one stick out?
Yes. It's doing a robbery recovery. They had a robbery in progress, and we followed up on it. We were unable to catch the suspect on scene, but on our follow-up investigation, we did apprehend the suspects. And in the process, I ran into a situation where it was a shoot, don't shoot situation with a young teenage child, really, because she was only about 15 years old.
Oh, my God.
So I've been there.
Is it difficult for you to see the scrutiny that cops are coming under today?
Sure. A lot of times, when we cut on the news, we see situations where it's easy to make judgments about police officers reacting too suddenly, which I won't respond on right now, whether they did or not. But my book will get you closer to what it's like being in a situation like the situations that you may see on TV and better understand what it's like. I wrote this book mainly because of my beautiful wife, Crystal. I would tell her stories regarding the situations that I got in as being a police officer. And after telling her many stories, she would say, write the book. And I said, the book? She said, sure, people would love to hear what you're telling me. And I said, well, maybe true, that's true. So one day I sat down and started to write manuscripts just to see what I could do. And the next thing I knew, I researched on how to proceed in writing the book. And I was able to find Page Publishing, and I took it from there, This is volume 1 of more to come.
All right.
And I am writing volume 2 as we speak.
Are you promoting your book?
Yes, I am. I am waiting for my first book signing.
You're prepared to get out there and talk about your book and share your experiences.
Talk about it, right, and let everyone know that this is a nice, easy read. It's beautiful to read while flying on your favorite airline. It's not bulky. It's nice and compact, and it's right to the point.
All right, good enough, Larry. Thank you. Rick Syward has been a writer on and off his whole life. Now he is on with his book entitled Incident at Rancho Alvarado, a mix of half fiction, half truth, he says, based in Tucson, Arizona in the late 70s. So what's the story, Rick?
It involves a bunch of hippies and Indians. There's only one family of Indians, and it's an old woman who owns a house, and a local government official has his eyes set on the house, And he's an unscrupulous county official who has designs on her 100-year-old house. And this group of young people who just live in a neighborhood down near the University of Arizona. Everybody was poor then, and nobody had TVs, and it was a porch society. Everybody pretty much socialized on their front porches, something that doesn't happen in modern day America too much anymore. And they form a friendship, and through a series of events, they end up helping the woman save her house from the county official. And there's elements of truth throughout the entire thing. A lot of local history. The street fair, 4th Avenue, is kind of the cultural center. Back in the 70s, there were a lot of head shops and used record stores and a food co-op and everything that the young and long-haired would need to exist.
Were you one of the young and long-haired?
Yes, I was.
Well, good for you.
It's about friendship. It's about the families that we create through experiences and common goals. And it pays homage to the better angels in us all. I lived through that time, and a lot of the truth, I had a very good friend named Kenny, and he died a few years back. And he and I actually lived side by side and shared a house down in the area that I write about. And the hero of the story is Kenny Lynch. He's a Vietnam vet who has some terrible brain injuries that has disfigured him and given him communication problems and social problems. But he's kind of the star of the show. I mean, he's really intact outside of all the disadvantages that he has. And he kind of sat on my shoulder the entire time I wrote the story and helped guide me through it.
That's really nice.
I've always written. I started writing in high school, actually in grade school, and then in high school. And then I made a terrible mistake somewhere in my mid-20s. I decided that I didn't know enough to write anything, that I didn't have enough experience or wisdom, and I stopped writing for about 10, 15 years. And if anything I could tell to young writers is, even if you don't feel like you have anything to say, keep on writing, because eventually you will, and you'll get better at it as you go along. It's like anything else. The more you do it, the better you get at it.
Yep.
This story's been stewing in my head for years, and actually it took me about 10 years to write it because I wrote quite a few short stories through the process. I've done one book signing at a store, and I've been invited to the Tucson Festival of Books this coming March, which is a big thing in Tucson. It started about 10 years ago, and it's grown every year, and it happens down at the University of Arizona campus. I take it as a big compliment that I was invited to be there this year. So I'll have a table on a day and hawking my book and talking to anybody who'd be interested.
Good for you, Rick. You should be proud. All right, hang on. We have more stories, more authors, more inspiration coming up right after these words. Don't you go anywhere.
Attention all authors. Page Publishing is looking for authors. Have you written a book and want to get it published? Page Publishing will get your book into bookstores and for sale online at Amazon, Apple iTunes, and other outlets. They handle all aspects of the publishing process for you: printing, cover art, publicity, copyright, and editing. Call 800-204-6099 now for your free author submission kit. That's 800-204-6099 for your free author submission kit.
Hey, thanks for coming back to the Page Publishing Book Club. I'm your host, Alice Stockton Rossini. So, maybe you have questions concerning the gay and lesbian community. Maybe there's some things you need clarified or you don't understand. Well, Harel is the guy who wants to answer them, and he also wants to tell his story of being raised in a gospel-singing family and then being pulled into the streets. The name of his book is Church Boy in the Dark. Harel.
The Church Boy in the Dark, based upon what we always say, what you do in the dark will soon come to the light. And basically it's just letting you know what happened to me in the dark. So because I was a part of a gospel family of singers, and, we were young, we were traveling, and everything that was happening to me seemed to be the opposite of what was happening to them in their life. So that's basically where the story part comes from, because, of course, it's only 7 chapters of the book that really talks about my life. And then we go into my informational, instructional portion that really gets deep and heavy.
What do you mean informational, instructional portion?
On the back of the book, it, of course, it expresses how, it's about, a young, man coming of age in early New York City, 1980s. And then it goes into an insert inside magazine. And inside of that, it features straight up the Homosexual Digest for the Straight World, which is a Q&A fashion informational designed to answer many questions that straight people have regarding the gay and lesbian community. I also have articles that I wrote in other magazines, one of them being Sunday Morning When the Church Shows No Love, which is an experience that happened to my son regarding homosexuality and the Bible and heaven, at a program that the church was having. He was told that, homosexuals are not going to heaven. And he raised his hand and said, well, he was taught different. And he didn't believe that. So I wrote about that. And then culture and racial divide, Beauty and the Beast of the 21st century. Of course, something that we're going through even today, the division of culture and race. Then also I wrote an article about Atlanta's Black Gay Pride Weekend, and I called it Atlanta Black Gay Pride, Nothing to Be Proud About, because of the African-American community here being so engaged in drugs and sex and, not really growing up, the young men not really being a man that they're called to be. They're, transient and just doing different things that's just self-destructive. So I talked about that. And then I go into my very first and very last sermon, an interpretation of the entire book of Romans. And I found why we're even in an age right now where gay marriage or same-sex marriage is allowed. It was in the Bible. It's in there.
So what made you write this book now?
I was on my deathbed. My son, I had custody of my son, and my partner was, trying to keep the school from knowing I was sick. And so we kind of hid the fact that I was sick, making family arrangements. Once I started getting those phone calls, family members saying goodbye, we miss you, love you, and all that, something in me said, I need to tell my story. I can't end like this. So I would get up and I would get to the computer and I'm typing up stuff and, just typing up my story. It seemed like by the time I got through with one chapter, I was a little bit stronger. I could see a little bit better. Chapter 2 is now it's another week. And within 7 weeks, I went from laying on my deathbed 117 pounds to I'm up one day, my son comes home from school, I'm vacuuming the living room, there's food cooking on the stove. He came running and almost knocked me over, like, Dad, I can't believe it.
How long ago was this?
This was in 2002.
2002, and now you're fine.
I'm still here.
That's amazing, Harel. What a story. Thank you. Linda Horde had a career in business, but her first love has always been writing, and as fate would have it, she has 2 grandchildren who inspired her to write Bedtime Stories from the Land of Imagination, Volume 1. Linda.
My 2 grandbabies, they traveled the U.S. in an RV with their parents who were storm chasers. They were doing insurance adjusting for major U.S. storms and hurricanes. And I was kind of writing the book as a comfort to myself, missing the kids as they traveled. And one day I was rereading my stories to my grandchildren a couple of years down the road. And as they laughed and giggled as I read it, I knew I had to publish it for other children. And I'm just delighted with the way it turned out.
What are the stories about?
They are various fantasy stories. There's one called Beebleberry Pie, and it's about an adventure that the kids have in a forest with their mom, and it's all of the stories are written with my background of years of studying healthy behavioral patterns as well as Christian principles. I'm a devoted Christian, and I incorporated that knowledge into these sweet stories and embedded little pearls of wisdom into the telling of the tales. There's a story, for instance, about little frog that would not hop, and it talks about fear and how the mother frog works through the fear issues with the baby frog and getting it to embrace its world. And another one is The Ladybug Wore Pink, and it's discussing a little pink ladybug that the children find in a forest and how it stands out in a crowd and how it's embracing wonderful issues about being different. In a cookie cutter society, how special it is to be different in this world, and talks to the kids about embracing our differences and how we're all individual thoughts of God, and no two of us alike, and little pearls of wisdom throughout.
Nice.
It's kind of refreshing and different from most stories, and I always feel like the best stories are written embellishing true stories. You know, life's kind of magical and inspiring, and I just choose to embellish what I see in fantasy and whimsical storytelling for children. And the presentation of the sweet book is delightful. The cover invites the reader to step into a portal from our everyday world into the magical, mystical, enchanting land of imagination. And there's colorful artwork in it, and it's all simply magical. And the characters are endearing, and whether they're animals or critters or little children, they add much to the exciting and enchanting tales. And I'm just pleased with the way the whole book finished. The presentation is just darling. And it's truly a book that matters, and that was important to me, that it holds a lot of value embedded in the telling of the tales.
How are you telling kids about this?
My husband and I would like to do some reading in libraries locally, and hopefully in Barnes and Noble where it's carried and that sort of thing. But I'm just beginning my adventures. I've actually been dealing with major bookstores, Hobby Lobby, and I wrote some letters to Dolly Parton. She has her imagination library that caters to children who may or may not have access to good reading. And so I've submitted the book to her, and various avenues that just come to mind in marketing.
All right, Linda, good luck. Finally, Catherine May Whitaker wrote a book before she died. It's called Wizard's Last Rule, and her husband, Jerry, is determined to finish what together they started. Jerry, how long ago did Catherine write this book?
She passed away 3 years ago, and she wrote this book back in 1980s and the 90s. And back then, you know, nobody wanted to publish stuff because her stuff has got colored pictures on every page just about, and it was too expensive. They'd have to spend $60 for a book. And
so you wanted to honor her legacy by getting Wizard's Last Rule published.
Oh, yeah, I'm trying to finish up because we both worked on it. I mean, she did all the artwork and she did the writing. I just was her, I don't know what I was, support, whatever you want to call a husband does that has a wife that's an artist and comes up with all these crazy ideas and
what was
doesn't care about being famous. If you want to know more about her, just go to legacy.com, Catherine May Whitaker, and you'll see a lot of her work. And she, in the end, somewhere in the 80s and late 70s, they have the Renaissance Fair here, and she started making elves and trolls and fairies, you know. You'd have to see them on the sites to see what I'm talking about. Because she did everything. She painted, she did frescoes, she did sculpting, and she wouldn't stop until she mastered each one, and then she'd go on to another one. She started a book about when Star Trek and that kind of a thing.
Right.
And then somehow it worked into this. It's about a naughty witch that wants to take over Elderwood Forest, and the wizard is going to put a spell on it, and
okay, so it says that goblins, leprechauns, fairies, wizards, and witches live in Elderwood Forest.
Yeah.
Until Witch Lena is banished by the great wizard Galvin to keep peace.
Right.
And in a desperate attempt to rule, Witch Lena attempts to steal the great wizard's spell book. So
yes.
The adventure begins when the she-banshee commanded by Witch Lena encounters the leprechaun Mac Flynn when she's trying to steal the wizard's book, and the book is ripped in half.
Yes.
And the she-banshee goes back to the evil witch to report while the leprechaun seeks the help of his elf and fairy friends. And what becomes of this magical adventure, we have to find out, and we have to read the book. So, how are you promoting the book if you're really,
I'm going to the bookstores, and I'm trying to get everything I can out of Page because I don't know exactly what they do for you. I know that, they can only do so much. And I know that it's not like I have a lot of money that I can go out and it's a book that's going to sell 10,000 copies or 1 million copies like Tom Hanks's book will, just because he says he wrote a dumb book.
Yeah, but you know what? I have seen and I have talked to just this morning authors who have hooked up with book festivals, holiday fairs. They've gone to the libraries. They've gone into schools with a children's book. They've gone to the local Barnes and Noble. There's a lot of things you can do, Jerry. If you don't want to do it, one of your kids could read the book, to little kids at schools or the local library. I don't know. I just believe if there's a will, there's a way. And I've just seen that happen time and time again. I really have. And it's the new year. Come on, Jerry. Let's go. Let's get moving, guys. Come on. Don't you want to be a guest on the Page Publishing Book Club? Well, there's only one way you're going to get here. You got to write a book, and then you got to get it published. So let's do it together in the new year. You ready, Rob? All right, we're taking off here. That wraps up another edition of the Page Publishing Book Club, but we've got so many more coming up. We are just getting started here in 2018. And do not forget to download these podcasts. Yes, our shows are turned into podcasts every week, and you can download them anytime you want. You can listen to them where you want and when you want. You can even do it over and over and over again. Yeah, in case you missed something. All you have to do is go to 710wor.iheart.com. All right, everybody. That's a wrap. Have a great day, great week, great month. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. I'll see you next time.